Hello, this is Dr. Schamberger, and we will focus today on crisis communication in sports. This is chapter 12 in your textbook. Um, I want to share with you how this discussion on crisis communication in sports aligns with our course learning outcomes. So in a way, you'll be able to, it just deepens your knowledge in being able to explain the relationship between sports and media. Media is the one channel in which athletes, teams, various organizations look to the media to help dispel crises that might be ongoing for them. In addition, it will help you to be able to reflect on ethical dilemmas faced by sports media, because when sports media report on various crises, it can put themselves into some ethical challenges that they might need to address. Now, in looking at what you'll be focusing on with this particular unit, hopefully by the end of this particular module, you'll be able to define really what crisis is in the context of sports and media. We all kind of know what crisis is. We're all going through a crisis, right? But really, what does that look like for sports and media when they're combined? And then be able to discuss the communication processes. There are three that have been noted in literature that really help to shape public opinion, that the power of the media to do that based on what we are told, and then really how that is used to help repair the image for that athlete or even for that particular team. So let's look first at what we're talking about when we say crisis. A crisis can happen at fault of the athlete or the team, so it can be intended. It also can be as a result of what we're all going through with the COVID-19 public health scare, really a crisis. And in many ways, it is creating a scare for a lot of people because it's affecting routines, finances, everything. So it is a combination of those things. Athletes go through this as well as teams. Sometimes they inflict the crisis on their own through their own wrongdoing, and then there are times when things happen to them. It's beyond their control, but it's still a crisis, and they have to be able to, how do they respond to that crisis? That's going to help indicate the kind of image that they're trying to preserve, not necessarily for themselves, but also for their fans, for those who rely on them. So therefore, it is those combinations of all kinds of events, and those events still require a response, whether it's intended or not. So an athlete still needs to report to fans and to other stakeholders when a crisis might occur that maybe he or she inflicted. It could be something he or she said, something he or she did. Likewise, a coach. We've seen coaches sometimes commit crises as well. Teams, commentators, even the sports commentators do this too. Many times they might say things that will create maybe a social media firestorm, but that's a crisis now they have to minimize. How do they do that? It depends on how they respond to it. There are many kinds of crises in sports, and it is a frequent problem in sports. In fact, many times when people think of professional sports, they might think of some of the good things. Maybe they went to a game, or maybe they have an affinity for a team or an athlete. But many times people think about the wrongdoings that have occurred in professional sports, and unfortunately even collegiate sports. There's cheating that has occurred both in the athletic competitive field as well as outside of that in academics. I have to admit, whenever I think of sports crisis, when we talk about cheating, I immediately think of the University of North Carolina. For several years, the basketball team was notorious for committing a number of academic scandals. Student athletes not showing up to class, but yet they were covered as though they did. A lot of problems would occur with that. So that is a form of cheating. We've seen fighting. We see other scandals that have gone on, whether they involve maybe steroids or any other kind of activity that may or may not be illegal, but nevertheless, it's been there have been attempts to hide it. Assault, we see this sometimes with players, whether it's a domestic assault case or even like within their family, or it could be even within the team. Abuse, sometimes press conference outbursts. Coaches have been known to do that. Of course, we can probably think of several, maybe IU's former coach, Bobby Knight, he was known to have some outbursts at games as well as press conferences too. There are other circumstances that inflict a crisis. Again, the COVID-19, other health issues in the past. Maybe there could be some finances that, again, because of what COVID-19 is doing, it is causing a lot of financial concerns. So teams are going to be feeling this too. So how are they going to respond to all that? So some of these crises are not intentional for athletes and teams, and some are. So no matter the crisis, though, it's still going to require the athlete or the team to somehow manage how they respond to this kind of phenomenon that might be occurring, because they need to do that in order to help make sense of it for the fans or even spectators. So that is really what we're talking about here in the context of crisis, sports, and media. So in using media, teams and athletes and coaches, organizations, they find ways to frame and respond, so that way they can continue to shape public opinion and minimize any damage that might have been done to their image. So they do this in one or more of these three ways: sense making and information management, image repair and apologia, and then antipologia. So we're going to go through each one of these real quickly, and explain what they are. So when we're talking about sense making and information management, we need to examine this through the framework of the fans. Okay, so think about when you hear of a crisis. It could be a scandal, it could be cheating, whatever. Just think about a sports crisis that you have known in the past. And you may have been maybe glued to your social media as you were watching updates, maybe watching it on ESPN. So you are looking, as an outcome seeker, you are looking for maybe a clear winner or loser in this particular crisis. Maybe you are hoping that to see your team really pull through out of this. Maybe you're hoping to see a redemption from your athlete. Okay, so then you would be an outcome seeker. There are some fans who are resolution seekers. So they're just kind of looking at this whole crisis in a way, as an event to watch. So they're the ones who would just maybe go to a game, for instance, or a contest and just think, wow, that was a good game. So they're looking at the quality of how the event unfolds. Um, there's a lot of criticism on those who watch a crisis might unfolding in the sports arena, um, and they really aren't looking for a clear winner or loser, so they're the resolution seekers. They're just hoping for just maybe a good outcome, no matter what that is. So if you remember back to your different kinds of sports fans, where you have your fair weather, so your fair weather fans probably would be along the same continuum with this resolution seeker. So the power of the media is going to be important here, especially with those resolution seekers, because it's going to shape those expectations of fans. So this is where the media is really important for any athlete or coach or team that is trying to help make sense of a crisis that has occurred, and how they're going to manage information that is disseminated to the fans and various sports media consumers. Image repair and apologia is the second communication process. Apologia is a term that really goes back to, we're talking centuries ago, with John Milton, when he even wrote the Apologia, and how he talked about how really, does media issue responses in the form of an apology? Is that really what the role is? Shouldn't it be a free information exchange system? Okay, so that's going kind of deep and philosophical, but it still has consequences for today. So when we're talking about apologia, we're talking about individual responses to events in the form of an apology. In other words, what kind of statement is an athlete or a team or a coach making in response to this crisis? They're doing this in the efforts to repair an image, or a way to maintain some kind of a positive facade. And that's the primary communication goal in all of this, is image repair. So apologia can occur at the individual level with an athlete, even maybe a sports commentator. It can also include those at the organizational levels, so at the team level, maybe a franchise level, even a sports network level, especially if that sports commentator has created quite a stir for that organization. There's also coach image repair. So just know that it really occurs at both the individual levels as well as the organizational levels, depending on what the crisis is. And then in response to the apologia is the sport antipologia. So really this is how fans, how consumers of sports media respond to the statement made by the athlete or the team. So in the beginning, the player or the team is constructing that image, that initial image repair for all the world to see. And what he or she or the team is hoping to accomplish is that hopefully this is the response that everyone wants to see in order to repair that particular image. So just a recap, the 3 crisis communication processes, and sports media really play a role in each of these because it's going to depend on what kind of cues do we take from our teams and athletes. So first is the sense making and information management. The second is the apologia and image repair. And then the third is the sport and antipologia. So like I said, we see this in all kinds of sporting events. And of course, as you know, the Summer Olympics will be postponed this year as a result of the COVID-19. You know, the Olympic Games have really seen its fair share of crises over the decades. And we've even talked about one in class in particular. And there are several that have occurred. So one of the things I would like to encourage you to do as you move through this module, you know, in what ways have the Olympics framed and responded to crises? There have been instances when they've done well and instances where they might not have. And not just them themselves, not just the International Olympic Organization, or the committee rather, the IOC, even with teams, you know, from the different countries, even the athletes. Some athletes have created crises even while in the midst of trying to compete for one of those medals. So really using the communication processes as your guide, what kind of instances can you think of during the Olympics in which a crisis might have been responded to either effectively or not? And that concludes this particular talk on crisis communication in sports. Thank you for your attention.